honored today to introduce someone who I consider as a great friend, Denise Regg, as our speaker. The path leading me to the introduction today has kind of taken almost 30 years. At a high level, I began my love for music, probably as a shower singer as a kid, and then at a very young age started tinkering on the piano. And then I picked up the clarinet in 5th grade, and the rest was kind of history. I found out I was actually kind of pretty good at it. So I was first chair in middle school, high school, numerous state orchestra, regional bands. Long story short, ended up as the principal clarinetist for the Youth Columbus Symphony Orchestra. So I have a special spot for the folks sitting here and for the work that Denise and her group do. I was headed to the Eastman School of Music. And I was going to become a professional musician. And my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, so I decided to stay close to home. And Woody Jones, who was my clarinet teacher, kept me at Capitol. So I've been a Central Ohio folk ever since. Spent some time traveling Europe with Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp as their clarinetist, but I don't play nearly at the level that I used to, but I try to stay as involved as I can with my passion and my love for music. So I'm on the board of directors for the Columbus Symphony. And the Columbus Symphony truly is a treasured centerpiece in our community as an arts foundation in Central Ohio. Outreach, education, world-class musicians, directors, and truly a world-class leader in Denise. I think we've all been touched at some level with our love of music. So if you're a shower singer or you're a professional musician, today's your day. So Denise, my friend, is the current executive director I mentioned of the Columbus Symphony, and she truly is a star. Prior to her appointment, she served on oodles and oodles of development boards in her career. I'll name just a few: Kappa, Catco, Columbus Symphony, Lincoln Theater Association, Friends of the Drexel Theater, McCoy Community Center for the Arts, Opera Columbus. She's basically got a really long history of great fundraising and arts management. She's consulted with many arts organizations on topics ranging from strategic planning to board development to volunteer management to fundraising. Okay, enough said. My fellow Rotarians, please welcome me in joining Denise Regg as our speaker today. Thank you.
I always feel short. Now I feel a little old too, Matt. I am not going to talk too much because the part you really want to be here for is to hear them play. So, however, let's make it a little fun. So, let's start, first of all, anybody out there who's a regular symphony goer, raise your hand. I see George Arnold. There are a bunch of you out there. The reason I'm asking them to do that is I want you to look around. You need to talk to those people after this event so that they can tell you why you should come. I also want to introduce Kathy Carnap. She's our marketing vice president over at the Symphony, doing an amazing job. I'm sure you see lots of things about the Symphony out there. You can also ask her questions afterwards. But I'm going to play a little game with you right now and hand out some free tickets to the Symphony. So this is how I'm going to teach you about the Symphony. I'm going to ask you questions. The one who gets the closest to the correct answer gets a voucher for 2 free tickets to the Masterwork concert of your choice. So here's a question. How many youth orchestras does the Columbus Symphony Orchestra have? How many youth orchestras do we have? Anybody want to guess? 15. I like the enthusiasm. We're down from there. 6. That is absolutely correct, Millie. And thank you for your kind words earlier. So here's a brochure and a voucher for 2 free tickets. I'll give it to you afterwards if you'd like. Okay, let's do another one. So you all think of the Symphony as the classical masterwork concerts, of which we do 24 concerts. We do 9 indoor pop concerts, including holiday pops, and we do 9 outdoor picnic with the pop concerts. So that comes to 42. How many total programs did the Columbus Symphony do last year? Counting those 42, how many total programs do we do?
65. 60.
Now you're not enthusiastic enough.
285.
Okay, anybody else want to make one more guess?
200.
Who said 200?
120.
Okay, we did 243. We go to the James almost monthly to perform for people at the James. We do a number of in-school concerts. We are at your local Giant Eagle several times a year. We go anywhere where we think we can take music to the people and it will matter. So you get your 2 free tickets in the brochure so that you can pick one. So, so people think of us as being on the stage. We do so much more than that. Now, since we talked about going to the kids' schools for just a second here, let's talk about the amount our educational programs attendance increased in the last 2 years. Anybody want to take a guess at the number of increased attendance we've had in the last 2 years?
100%.
Oh, I wish that was true, but I'm still very proud of our number, but it's not 100%.
25.
60%.
It's 52, so 60% was the closest answer I got. So is that you in the back there? Raise your hand so I can make sure you get your voucher. Okay. All right, here's one. Most of you in this room are business people of one form or of another. What is the economic impact of the Columbus Symphony on the Central Ohio region? How many millions of dollars does the Columbus Symphony generate in economic impact?
5 million.
8.
50.
What was the last one?
50.
50. I wish that were true.
14.
Who said 14? You're dead on. We do 14 million in economic impact. That's pretty good. Somebody actually got 6 youth orchestras and you got the 14 million. So that is all true. So I am not going, I think that actually gives you a fairly good snapshot of what goes on at the symphony. There is no better way for me to really tell you what goes on in the symphony and why it's important than to allow these people to do what they do. We have an incredibly talented pool of musicians who, by the way, come from all over the world. So Mayor Ginther the other day said that the most important thing that we have to do here in Columbus is to attract world talent, talent from around the world. I tell people every time I get a chance, the symphony is a microcosm of that. Our musicians are from all over the world. Our maestro is from Bulgaria. He speaks 5 languages. But we assembled them all here into the best symphony Central Ohio could hope to have. So they're going to actually tell you a little bit while they perform, and they can introduce themselves. But I'm going to turn it over to who's speaking first. I'll turn it over to Betsy, our principal bassoonist.
Put this on the bassoon is kind of heavy, so I'm going to strap it on here so that I don't drop it while I'm speaking. I'm Betsy Sturdivant, principal bassoon of the Columbus Symphony, and I'm very, very glad to be here with my 2 colleagues from the symphony to play for you today and to speak a little bit too. First of all, we're going to start with a piece by the famous composer Antonio Vivaldi, who was one of the most famous composers from the Baroque era. So the Baroque era, as probably some of you know, it lined up with the art version of the Baroque era. So it started in the early 17th century and extended through the mid-18th century. And Vivaldi was certainly a great example of a Baroque composer, but he was also an interesting human being. He wore many hats. He was ordained as a priest. In fact, his nickname was the Red Priest, and I'm assuming that's because he had red hair. And he was also obviously a very successful composer, even during his lifetime, which isn't always the case. He was also a virtuoso violinist, and he was a teacher. So he was probably the original multitasker. And we're going to play a piece from his very famous Four Seasons, which features violin solo. But before we start, I'd just like to say a little bit about the unusual trio that we have here. So you may not have ever seen a trio that had 2 woodwinds and 1 string in it before, but we thought since we can't bring the entire Columbus Symphony today, we thought we would try to just bring a reasonable sampling from the symphony. So the violins are very prominent in the symphony. The largest number of instruments we have in the orchestra are violin players. And the string family is the largest family of instruments in the orchestra. In fact, some of the pieces played by the Columbus Symphony are only for the strings. Then probably the second most prominent family in the orchestra is the Woodwind family. So obviously David, our principal clarinet player, and I are representatives from the Woodwind family. And the brass instruments are also very important. They're very powerful. They sit in the back of the orchestra because they're so loud that they carry over the rest of the orchestra very easily. And but not all of the works that we play require the brass instruments. And of course, percussion is the other major family. And the instrumentation also varies percussion-wise. So Vivaldi, he was an Italian Baroque composer. I don't think I mentioned his nationality. One of the most interesting facts that I've ever learned about Vivaldi is that he wrote 32 concertos for my instrument, the bassoon, if you can imagine that. Now, mind you, there's no other composer who wrote, well, most composers wrote 0 concertos for the bassoon. And some wrote 1, like Mozart, who we're going to play a little bit later, did write 1 that's very famous. But for some reason, and we don't know the reason exactly, but there are rumors about it, Vivaldi wrote 32. Now, he did teach at an orphanage for girls for a while. And there is a theory that one of those girls played the bassoon. We don't know this for a fact, but that's the rumor that has lasted throughout the centuries. So we'll go with that. So right now, we're going to play a piece called Danza Pastorale, and it's obviously a dance, and a lot of the music that we're going to play for you today is dance music. And Vivaldi based it on a little poem that you might want to hear before we play it. Here it is. Led by festive sounds of rushing bagpipes, nymphs and shepherds lightly dance beneath the brilliant canopy of spring. And spring is what we're hoping for right now, aren't we? So I'd like you all to be thinking while we're playing, if any ideas or questions pop into your heads, things that you might be wondering about that have to do with our instruments or the music we're playing or about the Columbus Symphony. We're going to have a question and answer session, so be thinking about what you might want to ask us. Now, the next piece we're going to play is from the next period of music history, which is the classical period. And who is the most famous composer of the classical period? Anyone want to guess?
Beethoven.
Beethoven is certainly one of them. Who's another really famous one? Mozart, that's right. So we're going to play Mozart. In fact, we were just talking about the fact that we wish we had programmed Beethoven for today too, but we're going to do Mozart. Now, one of the characteristics of the classical period was that melody became a very important aspect of the compositions. And Mozart was a master of the melody. You will hear that in the piece we're going to play. He was famous for his operas, for his symphonies, for his piano concertos. Both he and Vivaldi were very prolific, especially Vivaldi, because I forgot to mention that he wrote hundreds of compositions altogether. But Mozart was also quite prolific, even though he only lived 35 years. Can you imagine what we might have had from Mozart had he lived a longer life? He lived from 1756 to 1791. And we're going to play a selection called Voce Sapete, which is an opera aria. And we find it to be very, very charming. By the way, I want to mention, as long as we've been talking about bassoon concertos today, Mozart wrote the most famous one. And he wrote it when he was only 17 years old. And it is, you know, everybody who plays the bassoon, that's like the most important work that they ever learn. And it's asked on every orchestral audition. And I think it's amazing to think that a teenager wrote the piece. He was a child prodigy, and obviously the type of genius that he displays in his compositions it's God-given. There's no question about it. So let's see, what else was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say a little bit about the bassoon, since you might be interested in our instruments. So the bassoon is the lowest, the bass member of the woodwind family. However, it's not the lowest. There is another instrument that is often used in the orchestra that's even lower than the bassoon. Does anybody know what it is? Yeah, I know that you know. Contrabassoon, that's right. And that reminds me of something. I was going to talk a little bit, I think each one of us will tell a little bit about ourselves. I also teach at Capital University, and so all of us, we come from all over the world, and we all moved here to play in the Columbus Symphony, and we become part of the community, and obviously, and we buy houses here, and we teach the children who study music here, and some of us teach at universities and colleges locally. And so anyway, this past weekend I had the experience of playing the contrabassoon with the Capital University Symphonic Band, and I actually enjoyed it a lot. I had to get out a fingering chart because it's not exactly the same as the bassoon, but it was a lot of fun. It's obviously it's pitched an octave lower than the bassoon, so obviously it's really, really low and rumbling, but I enjoyed it very much. And a little bit about the bassoon. It's a double reed instrument. This is the double reed. It makes a sound by itself, but of course the bassoon makes no sound at all without it. So I have to make these reeds. Denise always likes it when I talk about making reeds. So this reed altogether in 3 separate phases that were spread out over many months took altogether 45 minutes. And only about 1 out of 12 reeds that I make is good enough to actually use in the Columbus Symphony. So I have to spend a lot of time. Every day I have to work on reeds. The cane comes from France. It's bamboo from France. It's the same kind of bamboo that's used to make certain types of furniture, and I'm sure they use the best cane for the furniture. So we get the leftovers, and everything depends on the quality of this vegetable here. So bassoon players have to spend a lot of time. The other double reed instrument in the orchestra, besides the extras, which are the contrabassoon and English horn, is the oboe. So the 4 double reeds are oboe, English horn, bassoon, and contrabassoon. And we all have to make our own reeds. So that's one of the main stories of our lives. So when everybody asks if I have a hobby, I say, well, I make reeds. But I also like to blog, too. I have a bassoon blog, and that's a lot of fun. And I teach, and sometimes I call that a hobby, too. But anyway, we're all very glad to be here, as I said, and the other 2 will be speaking after I do, and then we'll do questions and answers. But right now, please enjoy this Mozart aria, Voce Sapete.
No, thanks for having us here. It's really been a pleasure. Just a little background about that aria is about Carabino speaking about how he has feelings. He's a teenager, and he has these feelings for the Countess, his employer, and he doesn't know what to do with them. He says he's cold, he's hot, he's feeling all these feelings, and he writes a poem for her. So that's that aria. The next aria we're going to go is to Puccini, and Puccini was, of course, a famous 20th century, 19th, 20th century composer, and he wrote a famous opera called Tosca, and we're going to just play one of the most famous arias that apparently he was going to cut because he didn't think he had enough room to fit it in, but it became actually one of the most famous arias of all of his opera works. It's called Visi Dart, and it's about Tosca, who's an opera singer, and her boyfriend is locked up as a political prisoner by the evil police detective Scarpia, and Scarpia says, well, I'll let him out if I can have my way with you. And so she's crying here, and she says, God, why have you deserted me? Why have you left me alone, where I'm just an opera singer and I do these things for love? The next piece is a Dvorak Slavonic dance. We're just trying to give you a kind of a taste of what it might be like to come to symphony by just picking and choosing a couple of popular numbers. This is Slavonic dance is like a furiant out of Czechoslovakia, and Dvorak wrote about 16 of these, influenced by Brahms' Hungarian dance.
okay? Yes, okay. Now we're going to do a little ballet music, and probably the most famous ballet composer is Tchaikovsky. And you all have heard of course, the Nutcracker, right? And probably your kids, your grandkids, or your kids go to it just about every year, and it's a favorite of everybody, and that's by Tchaikovsky. And his music is famous for its incredibly beautiful, romantic melodies. But in this example, we're going to be doing a sample of sort of light dance in 4. So of course, ballet is all dance music, and that is sort of a theme running through a lot of this music. So now we're going to play actual dance music for you. And this is the dance of the little swans from Swan Lake. And I can tell you the whole story about it, but it's basically a big soap opera. The princess is turned into a swan, and she falls in love with the prince, and then he mistakes another woman for her when he's at a party, and then so he breaks the vow to her, and so then she's cursed for life. And anyway, everybody ends up, the heroes end up dying in the end. So that's opera and ballet story, but lots of pretty music along the way. So this is the dance of the little swans. Do you want to do questions first? Sure.
Does anybody have any questions?
So a couple minutes of question, and then we'll play another fun dance. Yes, back here. Oh, right here.
Have you ever done a flash mob?
You know,
Yes, we have.
we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tried to do something.
Can you repeat the question?
Have we ever done a flash mob in the Columbus Symphony? And we did do one on stage for a part of Beethoven 9 during one of the Twisted events. Do you remember, does anybody here know what I'm talking about? It was an event we did at the beginning of the past 2 seasons, at least. And it was a combination of opera, ballet, and Columbus Symphony. So it was a sort of a group performance. And it was very well attended and everything. And I don't think we're doing one for a while now, but we did a small flash mob for that. But no, we haven't done anything outside. Anyway, next question, yes, back there.
I understand that different performance pieces require different numbers of instruments and so forth, but when a symphony is established, or what is the makeup and number of instruments, how is that all determined to be?
The question is, you know, what is the stable makeup of an orchestra? Of course, a lot of that depends on budget. You know, the larger cities with larger budgets for their orchestras will have bigger orchestras as full-time players. 100 players full-time salaried musicians, even if they don't use them. You know, they use them regularly enough so that they know they're on call all the time, so they may not be used for every piece in every concert. Our orchestra, though, has a small core. We call it a core because we almost never play without supplementing it. It's what, 43 now or something? So full-time players. So, but it always has to be a balance of strings, woodwinds, and brass and percussion. So we have sort of, you know, as each one of those sections grows, and some pieces call for, you know, quite a few extra woodwinds or a few extra horn players. Then we just hire freelancers, regular freelancers who play with us. for single concerts or single weeks at a time. So it does vary. So anywhere from 50 to 100 to answer your question in the average orchestra. Yes, sir.
How did this particular trio of instruments come about?
Well, these are actually very clever books. They're called Music for Free. We're playing these arrangements. Somebody wrote very, interesting arrangements of thousands of great pieces. You can see how thick our books are. And so we can basically, as long as we have 2 higher instruments and 1 lower instrument. So it could be a cello instead of a bassoon, or it could be another violin instead of a clarinet, or we could have an oboe or a flute instead of a violin. So it's very clever the way they made these pieces, so they all sound pretty good as long as you have 2 higher instruments and 1 lower. So that's why we're playing from these books, because it's a nice small group. Yes, sir, back there. I know there were, I'm sorry, I'm not going in order, but somebody has his hand up to the pie. So.
Was it a bassoon that was used on the TV version of The Funeral of a Marionette?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
You wouldn't know that by any chance.
So maybe 1 or 2 more, and then we'll play.
I was wondering, how did each of you decide to study your particular instrument originally?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I haven't talked much about myself at all, but when I was in 6th grade, somebody came I had played piano as a young child. My mother was actually a singer, semi-professional, and so I played piano as a very young child from age 6 or so. And then around age 11, I was in 6th grade, and somebody came to the school, and again, I hope music education continues in public schools. He demonstrated, 5 or 6 different wind instruments, brass and trumpet and trombone and saxophone and flute, and he played the clarinet, and I just fell in love with it right away. Something about the tone and the range of the instruments. I was lucky, but other players, I think Betsy played the clarinet for a little while.
Right on a saxophone.
Yeah, and then found the bassoon. And the bassoon is hard to play for a young child, so often.
No, it's impossible.
Yeah, so, and violin, I know that there's a famous Suzuki school, Japanese training school, where they start children extremely young, maybe 2 or 3 sometimes, playing these little tiny violins, and it's a very systemized, way of learning. And so was it your first instrument?
Right. I used to walk around with a cereal box and a ruler attached to the box, and I would walk around. I was about 4 when I started on the Suzuki method, where you come in and you're with little kids. I mean, we have a great Suzuki community here in Columbus, so that's how I got started. And my folks were saying, that we didn't have TV, and they said we had to study music until we were in high school, and I just kind of stuck with it.
Is that the theme song?
Yes, ma'am.
We should get an arrangement for that.
we
Yeah.
have-
We'll play that next time.
I'm going to play one short piece at the end. Is that okay? 2 minutes or so.
We wanted to end with a little Irish reel called Drowsy Maggie to
Okay, why don't we do that? And they can
think
ask
about
us
celebrating
questions
St.
afterwards.
Patrick's Day.
They're going to play as we conclude. A few thank yous today. We had extra volunteers. Our Executive Director, Scott Brown, and Vice President Chip Chapman are out in California with the large club conference. The club sends them on. Past President Jack Graff, thank you so much for helping set up today. We're not concluded yet because they're going to, the trio here is magnificent. Appreciate them playing so much for us today. And hopefully you think of how we almost lost the Columbus crew because the city was not supportive. What Executive Director Denise shared that I heard was a 52% increase in attendance at those 240 plus programs in the last 2 years, which is magnificent. That $14 million economic impact is so big. But this was the 3rd in our art series. We were fortunate to have Peggy Dye a few weeks ago, Executive Director of the Opera Columbus. 2 weeks ago, we were able to have Chad Whittingham, who is the President CEO of Kappa, having Peggy today, our very own, present the Columbus Symphony Orchestra as our art series. So David, Betsy, and Robert, and to Peggy and Matt, we're going to conclude with a piece. Thank you so much for coming today at Rotary. We appreciate your time and your participation, and the Columbus Symphony Orchestra is one of the jewels of Columbus.